Hi, my name is Lucas Sin. I'm the chef of Jin's Kitchen and Nice Day Chinese in New York and New Haven. I guess the answer to the question why I do what I do is because I understand Chinese food in the US to be, broadly speaking, sort of like misunderstood. So we open restaurants with the hope of changing what people think Chinese food can be and what Chinese food should be. I've always been excited about the Chinese part of food culture. I think regionality is a really good lens through which to understand such a broad and deep cuisine. It's interesting to think of American Chinese food, or at least Chinese food in the US, as an extension, or rather as part of an evolution of different regions of Chinese immigrants, or Chinese immigrants with different regions ending up in the US. So a good example is if you look at a lot of the sort of like culinary basis of General Tso's chicken or a lo mein or any of those stir fries, like things that people think of as American Chinese food, you'll find a lot of regional emphasis on Hunanese or other Southern Chinese, Cantonese techniques. Here, especially in New York City, you're seeing a blossoming of a lot more different types of regions of cooking. From Yunnan, or in the north, you'll see northeastern style dumpling. You'll see northwestern style pulled noodles. That's a really good way to sort of start thinking about the history of Chinese cooking. I'm a pretty firm believer in uh, diversity building excellence. In order to understand any cuisine properly, you have to understand how complicated it is and how many sort of influences and confluences build a cuisine. You have to understand that foodways, the way we cook, the way we think about food, is constantly evolving, and that thought process oftentimes includes thinking from other cultures. And so when you're looking at Chinese food, it's just a matter of scope. If you wanted to zoom all the way out and say, hey, Chinese food is one thing, you could probably do that, but it wouldn't give you a very high resolution understanding of what Chinese food actually is. The more you break it down, the more you see how diverse it is, how colorful it is. Oftentimes, when people say Chinese food to me, it's kind of like saying European food. There are 50 something provinces, right? Oh, no, 50 something ethnic minorities, 20 something provinces, at least 4,000 years of history. It's so varied. And up until this point, most Americans only have understood a very acute part of what Chinese food is. And so, at the very least, it's delicious, and it's interesting to understand the other, all the other bits of it. One thing we do at Junzi is that we really emphasize a sort of a design thinking process for creating our menus and creating our dishes. I think a smart and scalable food business must understand that dishes are not just assemblages of delicious things, but they're also products that you have to sell. And in so thinking, if you adopted the design thinking, which is to say you create prototypes and you test them and you have hypotheses and that sort of thing, it really allows you to test certain ideas and misunderstandings you might have about something that you think you already know, like Chinese food, which is in my blood. One interesting thing about designing Chinese food for modern America, so to speak, is that if you look at a lot of Asian dishes or how Asian cuisine has evolved in the US, you'll find that a lot of chefs have designed food on a scale of Eastern to Western. Imagine there's like an Eastern Western, there's a string, and there's a scale, and they sort of like start in the Eastern side or the Western side, and they start pulling that scale towards the other end until it reaches a point where they think I can sell a lot of this, right? So dishes like that are perhaps it's a French style poached fish with a stick of lemongrass on it. It's just Eastern enough to say something about you being aware that Asia exists, but it doesn't actually. It's an invented dish, right? So it's kind of a old school fusion way of understanding how food is made. A more perhaps interesting approach to me is if you think of cuisines as clouds and you dive into a cloud and there are all these particles and you pull something out of this massive cloud. For example, you pull an idea out of the Chinese food cloud, and you bring it down to where your restaurant is and you start serving it to people. You ask yourself, are people going to buy this? Are people going to eat this? Are people going to enjoy it? If they don't, then you throw it back. You say, okay, you know what? This authentic dish isn't meant for this sort of market, isn't meant for my context, isn't meant for my restaurant. And then you go back into the cloud and you find something else. That type of thinking is a lot of how we approach what dishes to bring into what dishes to bring into our menu at Jinza. So tomato and egg noodles is kind of our signature dish. The funny thing about tomato and eggs is that every Chinese person who has a mom or aunt or grandma or whatever has had tomato and eggs before because it's very, very comforting to us. On the other hand, almost every other culture out there has a very comforting tomato stew-ish, tomato soup-ish type of a dish. You know, it could be shakshuka, it could be tomato soup with grilled cheese. It's there's something about that flavor profile that really resonates with almost universally. So that ended up being kind of, yeah, it's an authentic dish in that it is a dish that comes from the heart. It's a dish that's cooked in the way that we would cook it at home, but people seem to it seems to resonate with what people believe to be comforting and the type of food they want to eat at a restaurant. The word authenticity is a difficult word. It's difficult because a lot of people misuse it. People like to use the word authentic almost um, as a synonym for ethnic. The conversation that I hear a lot is, "Hey, I found a new dumpling place. I really like this dumpling place." Other person says, "Oh, cool. Oh, I've heard of that dumpling place. I actually have a better place that's more authentic." And what they really mean is that it's more exotic, it's more difficult to find, it's more niche, and it's more ethnic, right? So authenticity is a difficult word, and at the end of the day, I think the responsibility of a chef is to be authentic to their experiences of things, whether it's other cuisines or their own cuisines and things. And you can only be authentic to yourself. And it's actually quite dangerous to be authentic to a cuisine because you would have to claim that you represent an entire, in this case, billion people. So we think about that, but we also think about what at the end of the day, what resonates with people when they eat, what food that you might eat that might sort of draw a sort of emotional connection, whoever or wherever you come from. So I think that has been much more of a guiding principle for us in terms of designing dishes and putting dishes on the menu than hey, let's pick something that's authentic, or hey, we need to make our food less authentic so more people will buy it. Well, wontons are actually really quite interesting. Wontons I've been thinking about for the last like 2 week or so, because wontons are really wontons and dumplings in the US are primarily positioned as an appetizer, like as a small plate that comes with a bunch of other stuff that you eat. But when I was cooking in China, and then before the pandemic, I would make sure to cook in China for about a month a year, just to get a sense of what's going on in different parts of China. We would always have wontons for breakfast because if you think about it, within the wonton there's meat, there's vegetables, and the wrapping itself is a type of noodle. It's a type of carbohydrate. So it's an entire meal. And you would drink the soup that the wonton is cooked in. Some of the wontons would bleed, and then you would sort of like be seasoning the soup throughout the day. And that sort of comfort is really nice to me, to think of dumplings as in and of themselves like parcels that are already meals that don't need noodles with it, that don't need other things with it. In Sichuan, they call it chao shou, as in like your hands are folded over, and they're really big ones, but they're also those really small ones. And I really like the small ones with a tiny amount of meat and like an excessive amount of wrapper, because it's thin, it's like slippery, it's like a noodle, and I think it's very texturally interesting to eat. I've been thinking about that a lot, and actually that's what I cooked for the staff this morning for breakfast. Is everyone just got a big bowl of wonton soup.